that the next panel will be interesting enough to wake you up from the food coma. It is titled European Political Trends from Different Mainstream Points of View. This panel is organized in partnership with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, and we will hear perspectives on current European political dynamics and the forces shaping mainstream politics today, including the role of young voters and the media. Our panelists are Katalin, Cseh, member of the Hungarian Parliament, Alexander Ackerl, member of the Vienna City Council and Vienna State Parliament for the SPÖ, and Pawel Zerka, Senior Policy Fellow, European Council on Foreign Relations. And the moderator is Lars-André Richter, Director, Friedrich Naumann Foundation, Prague.
That is working wonderful. So thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much to the organizers. Thank you very much to you. I mean, it's a quite tough and demanding time slot after lunch, but I'm very happy to see a fully packed room, so many people back from lunch. And I'm very, very happy now to have the honor to moderate this panel. Let me maybe start with a kind of exercise, a kind of elevator pitch, so a question which requires a 3 minutes answer. Let's imagine someone fell asleep in the 90s. So 30 years ago, after the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall came down, and this someone, so Sleeping Beauty, wakes up 30 years later, now in 2025, so fell asleep then when history came to an end. And now what would you explain him or her in 3 minutes elevator pitch? What is going on? Who is Putin? Who is Xi Jinping? Who is that raising China? What is going on in Ukraine? And why is the end of history has coming to an end? What would be your answer? Ladies first, so let's start with Katalin.
No pressure.
Well, thank you. And thanks for having me, and also about this very interesting question. So, what time in the 90s? The first part or mid or?
90s, between fall of Iron Curtain and the September 11.
So what would I explain him what happened? Well, I would say that we didn't really use our time well. We didn't do too much, so you wouldn't be probably too surprised at many of the issues still being unsolved. Because obviously, if this person would ask me about, okay, so did you finally take climate change seriously? My answer would be like, but at least you did something with the inequalities, right? Like women earn as much as men in 30 years. And I'm like, how is the EU doing? Are we like finally strong and having more power, not only as a trading bloc, but the world has changed, so we are changing with the world, right? And like, no. So this is where I would start my answer, because we did not do the job we were supposed to do. We failed a lot of people who expected this turn to democracies, this change that we were all foreseeing with great hopes and expectations also in Hungary. It did not deliver. We tried, I think a lot of people tried. But if we seriously ask people in Hungary, for instance, here, did we live up to the expectations you felt when the Iron Curtain fell and you were just hoping for this straight trajectory into a prosperous future where you finally integrate with your Western allies, enjoying those values you were fighting for so hard? I'm not sure I would be happy to have this conversation with this person. You know, it's a bit different, but my grandparents, unfortunately, did not survive to see Hungary transitioning into democracy. They were those who listened to the Radio Free Europe in their basement under the previous system. They were hoping for that era to come to an end and democracy to arrive. And I am very sorry to say that here in Hungary, almost 40 years after they tragically passed away, we are still in a place where we have to fight for our freedoms day by day. We are being led not only here in Hungary, but in many European countries by governments, or we are seeing powers rising who are preying exactly on this inability of the elites and the centrists and the moderates to act and clear up the concerns people feel about their daily lives, about their wages, about the environment that surrounds them, their place in the world, their safety. We didn't do our homework, and this is what I could tell this person. And also that it is imperative that he and everybody who wants to live in a stable and prosperous country and continent joins us in this fight to put pressure on the political leadership to finally take certain issues seriously that are maybe hard to solve, but inevitable to be tackled. Either we tackle it from a values-based, progressive point of view, or somebody else will try their hand, and as we can also see it in Hungary, that is usually not leading into a very good trajectory.
Thank you. Pawel Zerka, what would be your story to this person?
Rafał Trzaskowski today in the morning said that it's easy to be in an opposition, it's difficult to be in the government. I must say that it's even easier not to be in politics like me. So unlike my co-discussants, I'm a policy fellow working on doing research on foreign affairs and on what people across Europe think about foreign issues, but I don't take the responsibility of a policy maker. So it's easy to talk about that stuff. Talking to my younger self or to somebody who fell asleep in the 90s, and with me always looking at the glass half full rather than half empty, I would need to acknowledge that the quality of life has increased tremendously since then for most people. That speaking for country I'm coming from, Poland, I live in France, but I'm fully Polish, and I moved to France just a couple of years ago. The country has made a tremendous progress in that time. Plus, it's in the European Union. Plus, it's in NATO, firmly rooted within the Western structures. It was not certain at the beginning of the 90s. I would need to acknowledge that huge change. At the same time, politics is not over, so there was no end of history. But it's normal that politics does not accept like a vacuum. So when there is a vacuum, new political arguments enter, and that's more or less how I see the politics today. Before we discussed this panel, you also wondered whether any of the long-term trends is more important than another, like whether it's internet that changed the most the way politics is done. Is it demographics and the migration which is changing the context the most? I would say all of those issues are important, but discussing them shouldn't let us feel comfortable about why we are losing as the liberal side. It shouldn't be a justification for losing elections, because it's like when you are a football team, you sometimes go and play in Bolivia at 4,000 meters, or you have to play in the rain, but you always have to, in the end, it's a game. You either lose or win. So we shouldn't be justifying the mistakes of our political side by the long-term trends, which are important, but which affect everyone.
Great. Yeah, the same question to Alexander Ackerl from Vienna.
Well, so I agree with everything you guys said. Amazing. So I'm just gonna fill in some blanks from my point of view. So I walk in the hospital room, my friend wakes up, or my grandparent, whatever, and I have to tell him everything that happened in the last 35 years. And I would say, well, there is one thing that you're probably familiar with to a certain degree. Capitalism is another stage of crisis. So we are back again where we have been like multiple times, because as we know, our economic system, which is capitalism, tends to work in cycles, boom and bust. And we are now in such a phase again. Big corporations are swallowing up smaller corporations. There is more and more accumulation of capital and power with like very few individuals and very few corporations, and they have gone into politics, and they started basically controlling many levers of politics and government, especially in the United States. So a trend that basically became visible first with Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher has continued to increase and to become more powerful, that basically money now decides what politicians talk about and how elections go. This is one thing. The second thing is that computers have become immensely more powerful than they used to be in the 80s and early 90s. They are so small that we can have them in our pockets. And they're not just computers, they are devices with which we can make phone calls and communicate with our friends. But most important of all, in the year 2025, these are small propaganda machines that everyone has in their pockets, where we spend hours and hours and hours and hours looking into the screens, whenever we are waiting somewhere, when we're in public transport or wherever. And the information that we get is often false and manipulated and very much designed to make us all hate each other. And it's working. It's working. And nobody seems to be willing to do anything about it. And well, so we are having discussions now in society, legitimate discussions, and people are challenging these views where I have to say, guys, the earth is round, it's not flat. Or, you know, fascism is bad, we have been over that. I don't want to provide any sources anymore. Fascism is bad, we decided that as Western countries. And war is bad, and autocracy is bad. And all of that has now suddenly become a point of discussion because society has become incredibly polarized. And there is now this gap between liberals, as we just heard, and autocrats on the other side. And this is also something that people who would have fallen into a coma 35 years ago wouldn't recognize, because at that point, the big divide in politics was actually socialism, social democracy versus capitalist political parties and political factions. And that was the big discussion, that was the big political struggle that was going on. And now this divide between autocracy and liberals, to a certain extent, is actually making things also very difficult, because the economic system remained the same, and there are still conflicts of interest which we can now not properly discuss because we are all preoccupied with defending the status quo, with defending free elections, with defending scientific principles and the principles of free speech. And yeah, it's not a good state that we're in.
Thank you. Let's come back in the second round to what we heard this morning in the speeches, opening speeches or keynote speeches of the two mayors. I think very, very meaningful, very, very emotional, very powerful. So one keyword, I think that was the mayor of, I'm not quite, one of the two mayors came up with, self-criticism. Why liberals or Democrats or centrists, whatever, should be self-critic. I've heard that many times now. So yeah, we need to argue against populism, but first of all, we need to be self-critics. What do you think about that? I'm just a moderator. I'm a little bit critical, I must say. Just one footnote on that. Since, I mean, for me, it's self-confidence. It's very, very important. I mean, self-criticism is fine. But what is your comment on that? Shall we? Did the centrist or did the center, the Democratic center? We come back to some differences later. But did the center, the political center, do too many mistakes when it comes to communication, when it comes to campaigning, when it comes to defining topics? What is your comment? Maybe we start with you in this round.
I agree with your second point. Self-confidence is extremely important, and when we are looking at the political landscape right now, I have the impression that the only people running around with just back straight and a lot of self-confidence, a lot of self-assurance are the right-wing populists. You know, they seem certain of victory. They seem certain of total victory in every political regard, and this is something that's inherently attractive to voters. I mean, this is nothing new. It's been around the political landscape for decades. I mean, the fascists used exactly that kind of self-confidence in the 30s to attract voters, next to other instruments like, you know, terror and intimidation and stuff. But self-confidence is really important. But also self-criticism, of course. I mean, as I said in my opening remarks, I think it's a problem that we let, you know, to a certain extent happen, that everything became a commodity. Everything became a commodity. Even our own personal information now is a commodity because we sell it on social media with our user interactions with the apps. And if you look at the political landscape in Europe in general, in many different countries, I mean, you're from Germany, many services that, you know, society used to provide for everyone, for example, social housing, has been destroyed almost. I mean, it has been sold off in Germany after the wall fell. So people have been experiencing a certain measure of loss of control, I think. Not only with their own social surroundings, with the way the government is run, their city is run, their neighborhood is run, but also with other issues. For example, people also feel a certain loss of control concerning migration, or concerning you know, the hierarchy of power in society. You know, you see Elon Musk and other billionaires basically deciding what's our discussion topic today, because they own the social media sites. They just buy companies left and right, and you know, the sense that I as a citizen don't count anymore because they're just people who are so incredibly rich that they just buy themselves whatever they want, be it governments, be it you know, publicity for their own interests, or even a goddamn rocket ship. And you know, I mean, remember during COVID when we had this billionaire space race? I mean, this is not only something that's interesting in the media, but it's also a sense of the loss of control for many people. And politics played a role in that. This did not have to happen. We let that happen, that certain individuals just decide on their own, without any democratic control, what is happening. And as a social democrat, that really concerns me. And I think this is something that we have to discuss generally, because if we want to fight back the populists, we have to talk about this, because what they are promising is exactly that. We are taking back control for you. And right now, the center, so to say, does not do that.
Mr. Zerka, what is your comment on that? So self-criticism, self-confident, what is the best strategy?
Yeah, I simply wonder whether, when you mean that politicians should be more self-critical, do you mean that they should do so only to show on an emotional level that they are with their voters, that they understand that the implications of, I don't know, globalization, free trade, migration that those implications might be difficult to experience for many of their voters. So I think that there is a value in showing such an empathy, but then the question comes whether after this should come any sort of a policy correction. And I'm afraid that the policy correction that most politicians believe is the only one available is to veer to the right and to close borders, both economically and towards people, because it's so politically dangerous, electorally dangerous, to suddenly come up and defend certain values of equality and openness towards people of different origins, and to defend that they are a value when they come to our countries, and also to defend the values of free trade, despite the various problems that globalization can bring. So listen, as I said, I spent my life mostly in front of a computer and talking to people in local France. But looking at the computer, at numbers which show public opinion on different matters, mostly for foreign affairs. And when I try to separate the noise, plenty of noise, from what I treat as a signal, I see two elements of a signal. One is that there is a strong attachment to Europe across the continent. True, the situation is not the same in every member state. There are countries in Europe where over the span of the past 20 years, this attachment to Europe has decreased. They include Greece or Cyprus or Italy and Slovenia for different reasons. But in general, trust towards Europe has increased. It's a majoritarian trust. In almost every country, majorities trust Europe and the EU, believe that are optimistic about Europe's future and have a positive image of the European Union. So if we see political changes where voters move to the far right, we shouldn't be assuming that this means people are suddenly turning against Europe. There is a lot of appetite for Europe. Simply that appetite gets often disappointed. And that's the second signal that I get from all of that data, is that there is a lot of disappointment and very often anger among the European public. And it's not just the anger which is amplified by social media against migrants, although that also plays an important role today. There is a well-founded anger and disappointment of an otherwise pro-European and liberal public at the mainstream who has disappointed them because they did not defend the very values that they should, and because for electoral reasons they very often are tempted to veer to the right, most notably on migration, because they don't have the courage to defend the values, both economic and social ones. And when they come to power, as happened in Poland after 2023, they fail to deliver on the agenda that brought them back to the government, most notably on abortion rights and women's rights. So I think it sounds super pretty. Yes, let's be self-critical. But then the devil lies in details as to whether this is as to whether after such a self-criticism you are really, as a politician, ready to adjust your behavior and also be open to adjusting some of the policies.
Thanks. That was a very, very important, scientific point of view. It's very, very important to quote statistics and figures. Let's ask Katalin Cseh then, based on your political experience, be it in Europe, be it now here in Hungary. What is your comment? Should liberals or the center be more self-critical or start directly attack the populists?
So first of all, I have to apologize because I missed the opening speeches in the morning. I was in the Hungarian parliament where I saw with my own eyes that a fellow parliamentarian of mine was sanctioned with a pay cut because of showing a picture of a domestic violence victim in the Committee of Justice. So I hope if there are any foreign press corps here, they take good note of this. There is a member having her salary cut because demonstrating violence against women in Hungary. I'm just saying that if we are talking about self-criticism, I would very much like the government to apologize for it and withdraw this punishment immediately from this member. So as I haven't been here, I haven't also heard the exact context of these remarks, because I think there are like two different areas. So publicly, I am not sure we should be self-critical. I mean, nobody likes politicians anyways. You are not interested in our ruminations about, how we regard ourselves. I think politicians should lead. They should have a vision. They should have a clear trajectory on how to reach that, how to show that a better life is possible for a nation or a continent who might have lost hope that this is within their reach. So, because of our failures to deliver this, I think we have to be extremely self-critical when we are in the back room designing our policies. And I'm saying policies because, of course, campaigns were bad sometimes. Campaigns can be bad. The extreme right can beat us on TikTok and whatever. But I don't think this is the key here. And this is why in the first opening round you might have perceived that I did not talk about the change in technology or in the obviously higher GDP that, of course, happened over the past 30 years. But, in my opinion, if somebody's still nervous at the end of the month about how to pay their bills, or if a young person is still nervous at age of 29 because they are unable to move out of home, or if a woman is nervous to go to give birth because they are not sure they would be taken back. I am not sure they are, the main core, like they are like very satisfied, at least I have a smart fridge that can tell me the weather for tomorrow. So as long as the core issues and frustrations are not being taken care of and respected and acknowledged by politicians who are supposed to be, the elected representatives of people, and yet they very often act that, oh, okay, you are not my core electorate, or your problem is a bit too inconvenient for me, so I act as it doesn't exist, or if I act that you are stupid, then how can any centrist force expect voters to turn out for them? So I think we have to be very, very cognizant about the challenges that are out there and that people are still facing. And to show them why we are in politics, because also something that I miss from politicians, and this is where the far right also beats us, because very often if I hear speeches, or if I look at campaigns, I sometimes feel that just based on what is out there, only the extremes are showing signs of believing in something. I mean, these things they are believing in are usually terrible, but when I see this person trying to be leader of something, with a very boring speech read out from a paper talking about small steps and incremental decisions and lot of technical jargon at an area where people just feel hurt and damaged every day. I'm just really not sure that they should be in this job if they cannot put their heart and passion in it. I don't think working with emotions, your emotions, emotions of voters are populist. I refuse to accept that believing in something makes somebody a populist. On the contrary, I think everybody who tries to be in elected office or is in elected office should be also very self-critical within themselves. Why am I in this job? Why am I doing this? What do I want to achieve? And not only for myself, but in the role that I'm aspiring to be in. If the answer is only that, like, okay, I only have 6 years from retirement and the pay is good, then maybe for the interest of the entire community, you should really consider, stepping back and going into consulting or something. Because if there is no vision in the center, if there are only technocratic solutions or people trying to imitate the extremes, I mean, it's always shown it's neither electorally not working, because the extremes are always, more appealing for those who really want this like very strong extreme right ideology to be present than like a moderate centrist trying to veer that way. And also these just not solving the root of my problem, in my opinion. So yes, self-criticism is needed, but deeply and more fundamentally, and not only in regards to communications and campaigning, because what we have is not a communication problem solely, but a leadership problem.
That's an interesting point. Let's maybe stick for a moment to the democratic center. I mean, we have two representatives here of, two very classical, traditional political ideologies, I might say. So, social democracy and liberalism, both started in the 19th century. So there's a much history behind. Question is if there's a future. So what is missing here at this panel for many, many reasons, it's a representative of the, let's say, democratic conservatism or Christian democracy, however we call that. But I mean, the question for him or her would be the same. What is the future? Since what we are witnessing in these years, I would say, be it in France, not only in the former Eastern Bloc countries, that's the same in Germany, that's the same in France, that's the same in Austria. So that the liberal camp, centric camp, the social democratic camp, Parti Socialiste in French, the Social Democrats in Germany, and Austria partly as well, the liberals in Germany, and many, many other countries as well, they are disappearing. Maybe, I mean, with respect to Poland, very interesting to see the results of the presidential elections in May and June. So let's say, liberal conservative camp and then we had a right candidate and an ultra-right candidate and an ultra-right candidate. So it's a completely different political landscape, both in Central Europe and in East Europe and in West Europe, and you name it. So yeah, what is the future? Maybe that is the first question to our analysts, so to say, and maybe the question then after that to our two politicians. Yeah, what can be is the future of liberalism, social democracy, democratic right, Christian democracy? Is it in cooperating more, or is it in cooperating more against populism? That is the Polish. We see that in the Donald Tusk catch-it-all coalition, or is it to make clearer the differences? I mean, you refer to Reaganomics and to the policy of Maggie Thatcher. I'm, as a liberal, wouldn't be that critical, to be honest. But anyway, that would be a discussion within the democratic camp. What is first of all? Then, the question for you: are we coming to the end of an era? And then the question for you: more controversial issues or more cooperation?
These are all very ambitious questions. I think that at every panel today and at conferences these days, there needs to be somebody who brings Donald Trump into the discussion. So I will be the one who brings the name. And I think, of course, Donald Trump if we are discussing long-term trends, we may say he embodies a certain long-term trends, but as himself, he is just a singular event, and perhaps will be long forgotten 20 years from now. But I think that we shouldn't underestimate. So even if there is a beauty in discussing long-term socio-economic factors, we shouldn't disregard short-term political factors, and especially in Europe's case. The presence of Donald Trump is important in many respects. Next week, so for self-promotion, but I'll be publishing an essay in which I will argue that Europe is in a culture war with Trump's America, and that this culture operates on two levels. There is an effort of supporting ideological allies in Europe by Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, as we have seen in Germany or in Poland and Romania. But there is also another level, and those two are interconnected, where simply Donald Trump uses every opportunity which Europe gives to him to humiliate Europe and to show that we are not really a serious actor. That's what we see with trade tariffs, or with NATO summit, or with how Europe's involvement in Ukraine talks looks like. What I want to say is that this is quite a critical moment as to whether Europeans will be able to show that they are a serious player and that Europe stands for something, or will they, during the next months, and a couple of years, show that they are not, and this could lead to a much more serious disappointment with Europe, but also with the mainstream, which still represents most of that Europe. I think that at the same time, Donald Trump offers, so in storytelling and in films, there is this concept of a foil, somebody who is in the story in order for you to understand better the characteristics of the main character. So like Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, for example. So thanks to Sancho Panza, we can better appreciate Don Quixote. And I think that Donald Trump offers Europe a perfect foil. It's thanks to the fact that he is there also that the different political strengths who are present in European politics can demonstrate their strengths, the values that are most important to them. Of course, it can lead to a continued cacophony and inaction on the part of Europe. That would be a problem. But at least on that side of values and a political platform, I think the current context really offers an opportunity to liberals, social democrats, as well as the center-right, to differentiate themselves and to show what they have on offer. But for the moment, I don't see, of course, the situation is so much difficult from country to country in Europe. The electoral contexts are very different. What happens in Hungary is hardly comparable to anything which happens elsewhere in Europe these days. But if I were to generalize, my general impression from what is happening in European politics today is that leaders are not grasping that opportunity that Trump is giving them, as if they were expecting that Donald Trump's how to say it exploits himself sooner rather than later, and shows how dangerous his platform is for also the American voters, in the same way as Brexit compromised itself. But even if we have had almost 12 months, almost a year of Donald Trump's presidency, I haven't seen yet him compromising himself, and we shouldn't be waiting for it. I see a lot of complacency among European political class, both in terms of hoping that Trump will prove to be a disaster and people would see it, but also in terms of, yeah, Trump would be just a blip, and after those couple of years, we'll come back to normality with America. But by the way, European public thinks the same way in a very complacent manner when we run our public opinion polls, as if the public and the leaders didn't take into account that after Trump 2.0, there could be J.D. Vance 1.0 and 2.0, and then, I don't know, somebody else.
Yeah, great. Thank you for the comments on the United States. Now Trump was mentioned. Yeah, Katalin, Cseh, question for you. Yeah, would the traditional parties of the center lose their profile in a joint fight against populism, or is it better than to make clear the differences between liberals and social democrats and so on and so forth?
That's such a difficult question, and I always struggle a lot with it, because for me, the situation is the following, that we did bad politics in Hungary, in Europe, anywhere for 10, 15, 20, whatever years, and currently now we are in a situation where the extreme right is very strong, everybody is much smaller, and in order not to have the extreme right in government, forces who are not supposed to be cooperating with each other are sitting in a grand coalition or campaigning together, and of course, yes, the country has to be governed. There has to be some sort of a compromise. But this also means that so diverse ideologies and camps have to sit in the same room. It's not possible to make huge breakthroughs, just only to operate the country. Let's not make it stuck. Let's, get the wages paid out and the roads fixed and something. But there is absolutely no space for, defining a vision. Even if somebody wanted to, if a Christian Democrat Party and the Socialist Party has to govern together and agree on the decisions, I mean, I don't really see how that is good for keeping out the far right on the long or medium run. Because let's face it, if there are these politicians who had their entire career built upon, I am the big rival of the other one, and then suddenly they are just sitting in a room together and standing next to each other at a press conference, like, hey, yeah, very good. Then I think many voters just regard it as that, yeah, they are whatever, career politicians, they have no values, they just want to stay there for the sake of themselves, which is not good. But also, I don't really see what the alternative is, because we are in a very deep slope now. Regarding my own personal experience, I was a part of my party was in an attempt to have this 6-party coalition joint candidate list compete against Orban in 2022, and honestly, that was a disaster. Electorally, policy-wise, anyway, there are parties that are just so diverse. And I was sitting at, I was a part of making the policy on women's rights, and there was a party in the coalition that we were supposed to be, you know, governing the country with, should we have won, that said that they just veto putting the Istanbul Convention ratification in the text. And honestly, I was a bit like, okay, so what am I doing here? As a politician, I don't want to be in this situation anymore. I think that at least in the campaigns, people have to try to make this leap forward with more ambitious promises, with better vision, better leadership, hoping that in the formation or in the lead up to a point where a government actually has to be formed, there is a possibility of carving something out that is distinct and brave. And even if there is cooperation, I don't think it should be on the basis of, you know, keeping the populists out. At least it should be on concrete topics. Okay, how do we fix housing together? How do we make it possible that automation does not hurt the livelihoods of those people who will be automated out? What is our joint solution on how to combat violence against women, or on, I don't know, climate change, or like policy-wise, why is it good for you, voter, that we are in this room together? Where does that lead us? But ultimately, I really believe that taking risks will be worth it for the long run. And this is what liberals should be doing also, not always be part of every agreement, not trying to be the popular ones all the time, not compromising our values or our ideas for some like trends. And I don't know, just for me, a very good example, he's in a different party, but like, yeah, this is like, I miss his speech also, but I really want to highlight what Mayor Karácsony has done for Budapest Pride. That he was in a situation where supporting Budapest Pride as a mayor put the city in risk of being attacked by the government. He didn't have a majority in the Budapest City Hall supporting him, and still he went ahead and he used his powers within his legal means to make sure that we could have the largest human rights processing in the recent history of Hungary. And he might have, you know, problems with that. He is on trial right now. Maybe the city will be punished, I don't know, but I really think that on the long run, leadership pays off, also for those who are impacted, also for those who can at least see that there are some politicians who have some values driving them forward. So this is what I would think the future for liberals to be, to adapt our values to our current circumstances and be brave and be sure of what we want to achieve, and try to show for the voters that, yes, with liberals, the future is better than the future without liberals. But this cannot be just an argument that I am the loudest against something.
I'm very happy to have someone from Austria here with the same question to you when it comes to the background. That's why I'm saying Austria is an interesting case. So I'm referring to the FPÖ, so your right-wing populist party. That was maybe one of the first modern right populist party with a smart Jörg Haider, in a critical way, in inverted commas indeed, starting in the 80s. So that was before the Iron Curtain came. Now that was before Berlusconi in Italy, for instance, was a modern kind of a kind of Trump 0.0 whatever. So I think Berlusconi was the role model for Trump, but Austria had Haider, and one of the reasons why the FPÖ became bigger and bigger in the 80s and 90s was the great coalition between Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats, the ÖVP. What is your comment based on that specific Austrian experience?
Well, when Jörg Haider had his biggest electoral success, I was 8 years old, so I can't quite comment on all of it, but yeah, of course. I mean, the big, great, grand coalitions of the which basically became the standard in Austria after World War II until basically now. I mean, we are basically now again in a sort of a grand coalition together with the liberals. And we have been for many, many decades on and off in grand coalitions. Of course, it leaves room for a third or fourth party to oppose and to be radical against the status quo, to basically blame everything and anything that's not going right, or maybe that's completely wrong on the government, and just creating a sort of atmosphere within society of revenge almost, of okay, now we're gonna show it to these elites, we're not gonna show it to the system, we're gonna avenge ourselves and how we have been mistreated and all of that. And this is where he basically brought a proof of concept that it could work. And he didn't do it alone. I mean, he was a very handsome person, very, very good rhetorically. But the media in Austria, they had him on the cover every goddamn week. They had him on the cover all the time, either with a controversy or with some suggestion he made or whatever, or some societal event. And this continuous exposure to Jörg Haider and his ideas, that brought him a lot of success. But the most important point is, he had his biggest success in 1991 with 26.9% of the vote. And now we had our parliamentary elections last year in autumn, and FPÖ surpassed that. And they don't have a very they don't have a rhetorical genius right now, or someone who's very handsome. No, that is not necessary anymore. Society has basically progressed from the 90s to a state right now where basically anyone as a right-wing populist could win elections in Austria, not only on the federal but also on the provincial level. And the question is why? And of course there are a lot of material reasons. I mean, who of us hasn't heard about those surveys which say that teenagers and young adults aren't now only depressed in certain phases of their lives, but all the time basically. In German we have this term Weltschmerz, basically pain for the entire world, for the entire planet, for our humanity. Because everything seems to be going wrong. I mean, in the beginning, climate change was mentioned. Well, we're not actually solving the problem. It's getting worse. I mean, we are doubling down on all of that nonsense that we have been doing for the past decades, and young people just losing hope. And that, of course, leads to radicalization from a material standpoint. But what I really want to say, and this is really important, this is something that I really deeply believe. Why in all of Western societies, all the Western democracies, like with very few exceptions, which have really different environments, really different situations, really different economics, really different problems and challenges, why right now is there a parallel rise of right-wing populism at the same time in all countries? Why? And there is only one reason that I can basically give where I think that this is a major part of it. It is social media. It is social media. It happened at the same time. The moment where social media basically became something on our smartphones, where we all started to spend a lot of our time on it, became the moment where political polarization and radicalization really took off. And nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking about that. We don't have the spaces for discussion anymore that we used to have as a society, because everything is happening on social media. And social media is, to the largest part, only propaganda by now. It's just propaganda from all sides, but especially from the right-wing extremist side. I mean, I sat in the plane from my vacation home from Greece, really great vacation. I sat in the plane, I sat next to a nice German family father with his family. And we, exchanged some niceties, and then we got back into our flight routine. We were rolling towards the starting lane, and we were scrolling towards the starting lane, and I happened to look at his phone, and he opened first news, this right-wing extremist newspaper site online, and then he was on X, and I was interested in his experience on X and his feed. And I could compare it to mine because I'm always also on X. And whereas his feed on X was 100% right-wing extremist propaganda, there was nothing. There is no exposure to anything else, no exposure to left-wing or to centrist ideas or liberal ideas. And if I compare it to my feed, and I'm a social democrat, I'm a left-wing social democrat, and even my feed is 90% right-wing extremism. And people are on that platform and getting radicalized on that platform, taking things literally that is being posted on the platform. And for example, the murder of Charlie Kirk, which was a reprehensible crime, of course. I mean, how long did it take for all the American oligarchs and the president and his cronies to start blaming the left? I mean, and you saw that like in real time on social media in different countries where people started to threaten the left in general, journalists specifically, you know, who made the big mistake of criticizing Charlie Kirk's political views and so on, and really, you know, basically promoting an atmosphere of hate and violence and intimidation. So this is happening right now, but nobody in politics is talking about this. We have to do something about social media in general. This is clearly not working. We introduced a system on our phones and in our lives that has not been tested in any laboratory. It's an open field test on our own selves, on our democracy, and on our children, of course, because our children are growing up with the thing, and they have been using it for a decade or more now, and we can clearly see that something is going on that will probably lead to a lot of misery and violence and despair. And as long as we don't do that and just let it happen, that, you know, a clearly crazy right-wing extremist from South Africa just buys one of the biggest social media platforms and nobody does anything about it. I mean, this cannot go on. There have to be limits, there has to be regulations, and maybe there has to be a different social media that's not privately owned, because profit interests are always seeking to undermine regulation, and maybe we should do something about that.
Thank you very much. So we agreed to, please. We agreed on giving the floor to you, so we have still time, I think, for 2 or 3 questions. Maybe we do that in a combination, and I would ask you, all of you, maybe then to answer to that. Before opening the floor, let me mention just 1 minute. So we were expected, I think you saw that in the program, we were expected here to be 5, so moderator plus 4 panelists. Michael Szymecka was expected to join us here. He cancelled for a very, very good reason. So he is needed. So our friend from Slovakia, from our liberal partner party, the Progressive Slovakia, he is needed in his home country, in Bratislava namely, since as you could see in the news, I mean, there are in many, many cities, not only the capital city, in many, many cities, there are ongoing manifestations and protestations against Fico government, namely against some social cut issues, but against the very close relationship between the Fico government and Russia. So we sent him our best readings from this point. But I'm very happy then to have you here anyway. So excellent panel. But now, please, 2 or 3 questions from the audience. No questions. I can't believe that. If there are no questions, then I would ask you, then, okay, great, wonderful, please.
So I guess in talking to this person who woke up after 30 years, one of the ways of phrasing what has happened in the last 30 years that you hear if you were talking to a lot of national conservatives, old people sympathize with them, is, well, the elites pursued policies which were, elites were pursuing policies which were in the interests of some kind of international ideological goals, but had nothing to do with the needs of the people in our country. And these policies included erasing our national identity, and they seem to be acting only in the interests of some ethnic or sexual or gender minorities, and are not in touch with what we actually care about. One thing that I notice is that that kind of language is almost completely absent and unheard in gatherings of liberal-minded experts. And I wonder if you have found ways of responding to those concerns that sort of catch hold on the ways of thinking that people from that side of the political spectrum have.
Who would like to answer?
So I don't want to get into like an ideological debate here, because obviously my colleague from the Hungarian parliament would have to respond to that, and that's just not necessary. But you know, in discussions that I have in politics, and when we're talking about conspiracy theories, just think about the World Trade Center conspiracy theory, right? So I'm saying to people, come on, do you really believe they're like, there's a conspiracy where people blew up both World Trade Centers and the Pentagon without anybody ever spilling the beans for like what, 24 years now, 25 years now? I mean, how do you think about your friends, for example, like friend circles? How long can you keep a secret between 4 or 5 people? I mean, there must be hundreds of people involved. So first of all, this is the reality check. Just think about your own social circles and think that this could really happen. But then again, conspiracies are something that happen in secret. And when I'm discussing politics from a left-wing perspective, I'm always saying there are things going on that are influencing your life and your situation, socially, economically, and so on, where major reforms have been made that are not a conspiracy because they're happening in the open. They're just happening because there are ideological shifts and there are organizations and lobbies and NGOs. And for example, when you talk about economic policy, it's the Hayek Institute, for example. They are really, really, really into privatizing and almost everything that's a public service right now. And this is something that's happening in the open, and they have been influencing public policy for 30 years. And from my point of view, the result, or a result, this is a result of what we have been talking about, the loss of public confidence and so on. So I would say that in taking on conspiracy theories, on the one side you say the real conspiracies are almost never true, but there are shifts in policy that have been organized. Someone thought about that. Just think about Peter Thiel, for example. I mean, he's a strategist and he's been working on the American shift to the extreme right for decades now. And we know about that. Is it a conspiracy? No, because it's been public, but it's still happening. So just making things clear from a democratically liberal side, I think helps.
Katalin, you want to add then as a final remark?
Okay, so I think there's a difference between conspiracy theories and maybe like a general widespread sentiment about something is happening over our heads. Because I think that people who think that the 5G towers are giving them cancer, I'm not really sure what I can say to that. Maybe to have like a push for a responsible government who won't ban vaccines or won't change like fundamental laws just because of popular trends, as we also see in the US. That's not always the case. But I think for those who are just having like general concerns about losing their identity or losing their grip on control or decisions over their own future, I mean, I would first of all say that there are two sides of international cooperation. And in my opinion, I'm a federalist, I'm a European federalist, and I say that very often the problem of those who want less Europe is that we have not enough Europe, because Europe is just incomplete. And for instance, the EU has powers to curtail our own financial policies, but does not have the power to have real overarching social policies that could fix problems for them. For instance, there is a possibility for free movement of people, but there is no possibility of having a European-wide cooperation of the security services who can track criminals over the borders. So I think there is argument for a more internationalist or more cooperative, from this perspective, to answer to the very often real demands that they are pairing with this loss of identity and culture. But ultimately, I think that at the root of all these is this very, very deep insecurity and anxiety about the polycrises that are happening around us, the climate change, war, repeated economic conflicts. And I think that politicians should give assurance of trying to have a safe place for every citizen, trying to govern in a manner that can provide individual solutions for them to navigate this complex cycle, and also to have an overarching vision of how these people very rightfully don't have to feel lost and confused and angry and left behind amidst all these problems. And where I want to close here, it is not really a policy response, but I think this is why it's so important that people talk to each other in person, to have friends, to encourage, as a politician, communities where people can meet. For instance, let's not close down all the bars because of I don't know, people, so somebody is complaining that bars are allowed. On the other hand, if there are no bars or there are no places to meet in a certain town, then people will just get more and more alienated. Let's have more free and open spaces to play sports together. Let's have dorms where young people who come up to the city can live and meet. So to encourage the forming of the communities, of friendships, of discussions and dialogues, because isolated people, I think, very often more anxious and more frustrated, but maybe just because they are missing this community that the modern society and, of course, politics who played on these emotions has stripped away from them. And I think this is also a part of maybe handling this.
That's a strong closing remark.
Can I still say
please.
something?
1 minute, elevator pitch.
I would like to engage with the argument. I think that's what we hear from people whom we have not very much listened for a lot of time, meaning the national conservative side. That the reason. So let me explain this way. My boss, Mark Leonard, over the summer, he published a series of podcasts which were quite new to ECFR because he chose to talk to representatives of the new conservative, or what he calls the new right, including Gladden Papen, whom you in Budapest perhaps recognize, and he was trying to understand by talking to them how they see the reasons behind the rise of the new right, what happened wrong after the end of history in 1990, and one of the arguments that he heard from his interviewees was that the mainstream center-right and center-left have all subscribed to the same hyper-globalization program, which eroded national identities and sense of security among large swaths of the public. And this is where the need for a new right to emerge appeared, and this is one of the reasons where they see their strength and the need for them to exist and play a major role in today's politics. And I think that this is an important argument that indeed there has been first of all, these are legitimate feelings if indeed they are shared among a lot of people and not just among the politicians of that movement. But then, if these are real feelings, then they require a response from the mainstream, which we started with self-criticism, which to my mind should not be simply self-criticism just to show the empathy, but a critical reflection of whether what was the trade-off actually? Because yes, we compromised on certain elements of autonomy, but in order to get something in exchange, the politicians, leaders should make a case for why it was worth taking that bet, and perhaps why it is still valid as a bet. But I also bring that conversations that Mark Leonard carried out because they link very much to this Donald Trump element, which is a small event in the long history, but which is a very important factor in European politics right now, because it's also American pressure, or the pressure of the US government coupled with the technological giants who are putting pressure on Europe not to defend the way we would prefer to, or our democratic majorities would prefer to understand and define freedom of speech, but to follow the understanding that is coming from the MAGA side, and which is very beneficial also for the economic interest of those allied with that movement. So it's very much this moment where way whether Europe can defend its values and its vision of free speech and whether it regulates social media would get defined. Let me finish with one takeaway for me, which was crucial for me. I very much liked the discussion about the big dilemma that political forces in Europe are having when they have to decide whether to enter big coalitions, fearing that they would lose their identity. I very much hope that there is a bigger common denominator between liberals, social democrats, and the center-right than just paying the bills and ensuring the continuity of the state. But at the same time, I do recognize that looking at the country where I'm living, France, and the country where I'm coming from, Poland, that coalition governments are devastating for political forces that are present in them. But my hope is that they simply have not found yet a way of managing coalition governments, while they probably should get used to those, even in countries like France, which are not at all used to coalition government.
Okay, thank you very much. Our time, unfortunately, is over. So thank you very much, first of all, to our panelists from Paris, respectively Poland, from Hungary, respectively Brussels, from Austria. Thank you for your attention, for the question. And see you soon. See you later. Thank you.